Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about end of the year planning for travel therapists in terms of like working around holidays. This time of year is always when people are thinking a lot about like what are they going to do for the holidays? Are they going to take a contract through the holidays or try to end their contract before to start another one after? And we get a lot of questions from people around this time of year always. So we want to cover a little bit about different scenarios, what might work for different people, because obviously there's no one size fits all for pretty much anything travel related. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that we're going into the fourth quarter of the year already tomorrow. So Whitney's going to introduce us and then we'll jump right in.
All right, for those that may not know us, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We're both physical therapists. We started traveling physical therapy back in 2015 when we were new grads. We worked full-time for 3 years as travel PTs, and for the last 6 or 7 years we've worked part-time as travel PTs, taking off a good amount of the year. So now we're semi-retired and we don't work full-time anymore. We're the faces behind Travel Therapy Mentor. Some of you guys may be new to our page. Welcome if you are. Some of you guys may have watched our videos or listened to our podcasts in the past, so thanks for joining us again. We try to do these videos on Facebook Live and sometimes Instagram Live as well. Every couple weeks. We've been doing them for, 5 years now. And we also will upload them later to our YouTube and our podcast as well for those that want to watch or listen on the replay. If you are newer to our page, we encourage you to go back and listen to some of our older videos where we cover all kinds of educational topics about just about everything you can think of about travel therapy. So we have talked about this topic in the past, but it's been a little while, so wanted to cover some of the key things to consider as we near the end of the year.
And like always, either on Instagram or Facebook, if you have any questions about what we're talking about or about just anything travel related, we'll answer those at the end, so feel free to ask.
Yeah, so if you are watching live, we'd love if you would just say hello in the comments and let us know that you're watching live. Let us know if you have any questions and hit the thumbs up button. Before we dive into tonight's topic, a couple announcements. So tomorrow is October 1st, which is crazy to think about. I don't know where this year has gone. And that also means it's National Physical Therapy Month. So for our fellow physical therapists out there, we will be doing some giveaways coming up for PT Month. So stay tuned. Tomorrow we're going to have a big giveaway on our Instagram account. And then I think the following week, or in like a week and a half, we're also going to be doing another giveaway / sale. So keep an eye out for that.
What's up, Jared?
All right, so thank you guys for tuning in. So let's dive into tonight's topic, talking a little bit about planning your travel therapy contracts around the holidays and around the new year.
Yeah, so there's two different types of people that this might apply to: current travelers or aspiring travelers, like people that are getting ready to get into travel. And a lot of it is the same no matter which person you are, whether you're on contract now or you're just thinking about starting to travel. But for the most part, there's three options. There's you can either take a contract now, ask for the holidays off, which a lot of people do. But there's some issues with that sometimes with trying to find a contract where they're willing to give you the days off, depending on what their needs are. You could also take a contract before and just work some of the holidays. We did that a ton. We would work through the holidays, go home on different days to see family and stuff like that. A lot of our contracts were relatively close to home, so we could drive just for the weekend, and we would try to work around as much as we could because we didn't like to take days off. And then the other option would be to just end the contract before the holidays start, take off completely, and then start again after the holidays, which is very popular. A lot of people do that, but of course there's some issues with that as well. So we're going to go through each of those different scenarios, some of the pros and cons, and try to help you guys figure out what you want to do with your own contracts.
Yeah, and the only big difference there would be if you're an aspiring traveler or current traveler. A lot of current travelers are kind of familiar with it, and they always plan to end a contract, take off the holidays, and start a new contract in January. There's also quite a lot of people that are planning to start travel therapy for the first time, whether they decide to leave their permanent job and get into travel therapy, or they are a new grad who's like, I'll just start after the new year. So a lot of people who are new travelers plan to just finish up whatever it is they're doing this year, and then have the holidays open so they can go see family. So they might quit their perm job right before the holidays, or whatever that might be, or maybe they just graduated and they're like, I'm gonna take a couple months off and I will start my very first travel therapy contract in January. So we hear that quite often, and so we want to talk about, again, just some different pros and cons of these different strategies, because rest assured you're not the only one who is thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny, everyone, us included, you think like, oh, I'm the only one, or you think that your situation's special, but in reality, there's 1,000 other people going through the same thing as you. And we think about that a lot now with Whitney being pregnant and about to have a baby and everything. Like, all these other people have gone through the exact same concerns and worries and all that, and it's just kind of funny how that works.
Yep. So in general, as far as like the big two things would be, am I going to take a contract that runs me through the holidays, or am I going to wait and take one after? So one of the biggest challenges with waiting to take one after the holidays, and so for whatever reason taking off during the holidays, is that there is a lot of competition for jobs in January. So a lot of people are trying to use the same strategy, and so it makes it harder to find a contract at the beginning of January. One, because there's more competition, because everybody kind of has in mind like, oh, I'll just start the first week of January. So let's see what this year is. Usually January 1st is a Wednesday. So sometimes the Thursday is off. So some people think like, okay, I'll start on January 3rd, or maybe the following Monday, January 6th, right? So now there's a ton of people that want to start January 6th. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's always going to be a job that needs somebody January 6th. And it makes for a lot of competition. The other problem is when it comes to going through the process of trying to find a contract, the days and weeks leading up to trying to find your contract, people are also away on holidays. So some of the recruiters have taken off. Some of the managers who would be interviewing for these jobs have taken off. The people who would be helping you to set up your credentialing and all that have taken off. So what ends up happening is, even though a lot of people think like, oh yeah, I'll start on January 3rd or January 6th, quite often that start date ends up getting pushed back further because you can't get all those things done over the holidays.
Yeah, if you've watched our videos in the past, we've made videos about the January job lull. That's what people talk about it in the travel therapy world. There's this issue with trying to start a job at the beginning of January, and a lot of recruiters and travelers will talk about there being a lull in the market. Really, it's not a lull in the market, it's just that there's so many people wanting to start right at that same time, whereas throughout the rest of the year, it's more spread out. So a lot of people want to start right at the beginning of January, and there's not a lot of extra jobs, and if anything, there might be fewer jobs at the beginning of January because companies are reassessing for the new year. Like Whitney said, there's a lot of people that have time off. So if anything, there's more people looking for jobs and there's less jobs available. So that can cause issues if you're planning to, finish a contract, say December 20th, and you're like, okay, I'm going to start first week of January. There's a lot of other people that are looking at that same situation. And so it can be very difficult, and often you won't start on the first week of January because there's so many other people looking. It might be the second or third week. And so you just have to plan for that. If you think you're going to just start on the exact day you want at the beginning of January, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind when it comes to if you really need the income during those weeks, because some people might be really disappointed to find this out. And then they're like, oh gosh, well now I'm delayed working 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without pay. This is not how I thought it was going to go at all. So we want you to be prepared for that as a possibility. Now I will say, because the job market is very strong right now, especially for physical therapists, this may not be as much of an issue this coming year. We have heard from some recruiters that there are certain jobs that are going ahead and booking in advance for a January start. And if that's the case, that's the ideal situation for a lot of you, right? Like if you could go ahead now in like October or November and book in advance for a January start and just already have all that credentialing and the interviews done and everything lined up, and then it would be your ideal start date on the 3rd or the 6th or whatever it is, then that would be amazing. So it definitely doesn't hurt to ask the recruiters to try to apply for the jobs, to try to get that to happen. But the further in advance you can start trying to plan for this and find out if it's realistic or not, the better.
The downside of that, though, booking contracts way in advance, like yes, it seems awesome to have it locked in, and very often it is awesome to have it locked in, but keep in mind that booking something that far out, there's a lot more risk of it being canceled along the way, and it hurts more to have a contract canceled than it does to just have an issue finding a contract, because you already are anchored to that location and ready to go. Whereas, if you just can't find a contract, it's tough, but it's not as bad as having one canceled. So it is more risk of having a contract canceled. So say you book it now, 3 months ahead, there's a lot that can change in a 3-month time period. Maybe they hire somebody new, maybe staffing changes, maybe someone comes from a different clinic, maybe their patient volumes decrease. So there's a lot that can happen in that 3 months.
Yeah, so there are pros and cons to trying to wait to start in January. You can certainly make it work, but just go into it knowing that it may not work out. You may end up, if you wait to try to find something for that first week of January, you may end up starting a little later than what you expected.
Yep.
And maybe that's okay with you, but we just want you to be aware that that is a possibility. We do see it quite often.
Yeah, and there's so many different types of travelers. There's some people, if they have a couple weeks off, not a big deal. Unplanned time off is not a big deal to them. When we were traveling, it was mostly my fault, but we were very regimented. We always wanted to be starting on the day that we wanted to start. So if we finished a contract on Friday and we had nothing that we had planned that next week, we wanted to start on the next Monday. And we always had it lined up like that. So we planned way more in advance to make that work, especially for both of us looking for outpatient jobs. Whereas there's some people that just don't care as much, and it's not a big deal if you miss 2 or 3 weeks of work unplanned. So it just depends on the type of traveler you are.
So the other scenario would be that you go ahead and try to get started on a contract now or sometime before the holidays that would go through the holidays, and either you try to negotiate some of the time off that you need for the holidays, or you just accept that you're going to have to work some. Quite often this strategy works out better because you can beat out some of the competition for everyone else who's waiting to start in January. So you might be able to get your foot in the door at a job a little bit easier if you make some concessions and are a little bit more willing to work around the holidays. But of course, maybe this doesn't work for your lifestyle. Maybe this doesn't work for your plans with your family and that sort of thing. So it's not going to be ideal for everybody, but it can work out really well sometimes if you can be willing to start a contract before the holidays and then just figure out the holiday situation and have it run all the way through December, January.
For us, this was always kind of the ideal. Start a new contract in end of October, beginning of November, so that you're already kind of settled in going into the holidays. And for us, a lot of times we either working outpatient, sometimes the clinics would be closed, but if they weren't, working on the holiday wasn't a big deal. We could always figure out time to celebrate other times. So we worked on some Thanksgivings and things like that. I think I worked on Christmas Day one time in acute care. So we didn't really care as much about that. And often we found that the holidays, even when you work on them, it doesn't feel like a regular workday anyway. And even the time surrounding Christmas and Thanksgiving, patients cancel, they've got things going on. So we enjoyed working around that time of the year, whereas some people don't want to work around Christmas at all.
Yeah. So Jared kind of alluded to some of the strategies that you could use if being close to family or trying to plan for the holidays is an issue. A lot of people choose to take contracts around this holiday end of the year season closer to home, so that if you do need to request off or whatever it might be, you could not have to request off quite as many days. So maybe you only need the actual holiday off or just one day off or whatever it might be, and then you could still be driving distance to home. Some people choose to take true local contracts, like truly go actual home and take an all taxed local contract during the holidays. That could be another strategy. Some other people consider, working the holiday, but then celebrating the holiday on a different day with family. We've done this quite often because, now that we're married, we have to take into account 2 families. And then Jared's parents are also divorced, so then we have to basically take into account 3 families. So we're very accustomed to doing holidays on days that are not the actual holiday, and there are certain families that do that as well. So that is a consideration too. When it comes to strategizing and planning around work, you could consider just celebrating with them on a different day. All right, any questions or comments coming in? Got a couple here on Instagram. If anybody has any questions on Facebook as well, feel free to leave them in the comments. We'll get to them toward the end. We'll kind of talk about some more strategies here first. And again, if you guys are watching, if you are enjoying the video, we'd love if you would just hit the thumbs up button, say hi in the comments, let us know. All right, so say that you do decide to go ahead and take a contract that is going to go through the holiday season, and then you're trying to strategize, how could I negotiate some time off? So ultimately, it's going to depend on the facility's needs. So you can always ask, just like with anything, everything is negotiable in a travel therapy contract, but they might not always be able to accommodate. We've had situations before where we, requested X, Y, and Z, and the facility just turned us down and took a different candidate who didn't need all those things. Yeah,
and there's kind of 2 ways to do this. One, you could ask ahead of time, which is the smart thing to do if it's really important for you to be off on the specific day. Ask ahead of time and have that in your contract. The other thing is you could wait and ask later. That's much less likely that they will give you that time off, but depending on the situation, they might be able to. If you ask ahead of time, like Whitney said, you run the risk of them just not being able to accommodate it and just not being able to, not accepting you for the contract because they need you on those days. And that's very often the case because the permanent staff also obviously wants the holidays off, and a lot of clinics are short-staffed around the holidays. So they're going to rely more on travelers for those days than they would other times of the year. So yes, if you ask for it ahead of time, there is the likelihood that you might not get the contract. But if you don't ask for it ahead of time and you think you're just going to ask in the middle of your contract, like beginning of December, oh, I would really like to have Christmas Day off, I want to go home and see my family, often they just won't be able to do that. So two different ways that you can handle it. Most of the time you're going to want to ask for it ahead of time if that's important to you.
Yeah, you really have to take into consideration the facility's needs, because a lot of times, especially for maybe like a hospital system where they're more corporate, we know our friends that work in permanent positions, you have to be asking for your PTO months in advance. So the permanent staff has already locked their PTO in months in advance. They've asked off. And so maybe the facility is hiring a traveler specifically to help through the holidays. You're there to fill that gap because the perm staff is already off. And so that's already locked in. You can't control that. And so they might just pass you over for a different candidate. But as always with any kind of negotiation, it really depends on just your amount of leverage, how desperate they are. Sometimes that may not be ideal if you ask off the holiday, but if they don't have any other candidates, they may go ahead and just take you and they'll just have to make it work.
Yeah, something you can do that might make it more attractive to the facility is to offer to work on different days than the actual holiday. So say it's an acute care hospital and you say, well, I'd like to have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, but I can work the next weekend or something like that. And in some cases that will mean a lot to them. Like ahead of time when you're submitting for this contract, tell them that, or say you can make up the weekend before, the weekend after, depending on the clinic that might work or it might not. Obviously if it's outpatient and they're closed on the weekends, that's not going to make a difference. Or you could even offer to work like 10-hour days, the days heading up to the holiday, and 10-hour days after the holiday or something like that to make up the hours. Because sometimes the issue is the hours more than it is the actual day itself.
Mm-hmm. Similarly, if you are starting a contract that's going to go through multiple holidays, so for example, this holiday season that's coming up, we're talking mostly about like Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, New Year's Day. Maybe you negotiate by saying, I'll work Thanksgiving, but I'd like to have Christmas off, or vice versa. So trying not to ask off for all the holidays, but maybe just one or two, or maybe you're like, I'll work Christmas Eve, but could I have Christmas Day off? So, try to strategize that way.
Yeah, and then there also are situations, especially if it's an outpatient clinic, where you won't have to worry about it all because the facility will be closed. And in that case, you're more worried about how you're going to get your hours, or, if you have an hourly guarantee, how that's going to work. Than about actually having the day off because the clinic will be closed anyway.
Yeah, so that's super important to ask when it comes to this time of year. Looking ahead, as travelers, we do have to think like for the whole 3-month duration. Like we pretty much always, when we go into signing a contract and we know, okay, our start date's going to be October 1st, so that'll be October, November, December, October 1st through January 1st or whatever it's going to be, we look ahead at our whole calendar and we usually try to plan for whatever that's going to be, and any days that we want off, we would try to negotiate in advance. So you would look ahead when you're interviewing for this job and say, hey, I know it's only September or October, but is your facility open on these days, and these days? And maybe they just say like, oh, no, our facility's closed those days. And then you're like, okay, well, I don't even have to worry about it. Like a lot of places, for example, might be closed on both Thanksgiving and the Friday, or they might only be closed on Thanksgiving, but then open on the Friday. So in some cases, maybe you are willing to work, well, in that scenario, that wouldn't help. So you might still have to ask off the Friday. But say it was a hospital, say you could negotiate like, well, I'll work on Thanksgiving, but can I have the Friday off? And then you could go home for a long weekend, something like that. So be sure to ask in your interview, are they even open? And what does that look like?
Yep. So then let's talk about guaranteed hours. So like I said, in a situation, say you're working outpatient and the clinic is closed, how do guaranteed hours work for those hours that you might have missed from that contract?
Yeah, so if they're closed, then it's important this is when you'd probably talk to your recruiter and be like, in my contract, am I going to have guaranteed hours? And how do the guaranteed hours work if the facility's closed and I don't have a choice? Sometimes if the facility is closed and that's not your choice to work or not work that day, then they will uphold your guaranteed hours. But sometimes guaranteed hours on contracts will say that it does not count for holidays. It'll say like, no, this doesn't count. You don't get paid for that day. If that's the case and you still want to try to get paid for that day, but there's no choice for you to make up the hours, on that day or on the weekend, then that's when you could try to shift your hours for the week. If you still really, really want to get 40 hours, you could try to work 410s or something like that. But you definitely need to ask, how do my guaranteed hours work in this scenario?
Yeah, this varies a lot depending on which travel company you're working with. There are some that if the clinic is closed for a holiday, your guaranteed hours just don't apply that week. So say you have a 40-hour guarantee, but you can only get 32 that week, but you just get paid for 32. There's other travel companies that will still pay you for those 40 hours because it's out of your control. And that also applies to things like with the hurricane going through, this is applicable. Say you're on contract and there was an inclement weather day and the clinic was closed. Some companies won't count that for your guaranteed hours, whereas other companies will. So make sure before you go into a travel contract thinking that you're going to get paid for these hours, make sure you clarify that with the recruiter and the travel company. What is their policy? Does this apply to holidays? Would I still get paid 40 hours for this even though the clinic is closed? Again, this depends on your setting, because if you're working skilled nursing or acute care, inpatient, you're probably not going to have those days off anyway. But if you're working home health or outpatient, it might be a situation where you're not able to work those days, and are you going to get paid for them anyway?
Mm-hmm. So ideally you try to find this information out when you're signing your contract, just so that you have the expectations, you understand how it's going to work, and you can plan ahead. However, if you're listening right now and you're already in a contract that is going to take you through the holidays and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know the answers to any of these questions, well, go ahead and ask now. Go ahead and start talking to your manager at your current contract and say, like, are you open these days? Am I going to be having to work these days? If I don't work, then XYZ, and then talk to your recruiter, look at your contract, figure out how the guaranteed hours are going to work in that scenario. See if there's any way you can negotiate it or rearrange your schedule to make it work if you're concerned about not getting paid. But the worst is just showing up during that week, not having planned ahead at all, and then not getting paid for it, and then being disappointed because you weren't paid.
Yep.
So that's kind of if they are closed. Now, what if they're open, but you request off?
So in that situation, if you request a day off, you had a 40-hour guarantee, say you ask for Thanksgiving and the day after Thanksgiving off, and you only work 24 hours, you're pretty much I don't know of any travel company, I don't think any travel company would ever pay you for the days that you don't work if you request those days off specifically. So that's very different than the clinic being closed and you not being able to work. So pretty much always, if you ask for those days off specifically before your contract or during your contract, you're not going to get paid guaranteed hours for that week where you ask for hours off. And I mean, I think most people understand that, but there are people, every now and then we get questions that they're confused, they ask for the time off, they make less money, they don't understand, they have guaranteed hours. Well, you're not going to get paid guaranteed hours for a week that you ask for hours off.
Typically, yeah. And this is this is a good time to talk a little bit about like guaranteed hours and also guaranteed stipends. So typically in the past, almost all companies, when it comes to guaranteed hours, I guess I'll just explain for those of you that may not know what guaranteed hours are. So in your contract, it'll say something like 40 hours guaranteed. That means that even if something happens, typically like census being low, like you get called off because there's no patients for you to see, they still guarantee they're going to pay you for all 40 hours, even if you got to go home early because your last patient canceled or the facility didn't have all the beds full, so there wasn't a full caseload for you. That's usually when your guaranteed hours are like supposed to work. There are certain circumstances, like we mentioned, where it does work in your favor for just other reasons, like inclement weather or holidays or whatever. But most of the time, it's guaranteeing your hours even if their caseload is low. Typically, if you don't have a 40-hour guarantee, maybe you'll have like a 36-hour guarantee or a 32-hour guarantee. So this means like most weeks you'll probably work 40, but if you get cut a couple hours, they're only on the hook for paying you for 36 or 32 or whatever. So we always encourage you to try to get some hourly guarantee, hopefully above at least 30 hours in your contract. Now, typically, most companies historically, if you don't get beyond your guaranteed hours, say you only have a 32-hour guarantee and you only work 32 hours that week, typically they would prorate or like take away pay for both your stipends and your hourly for any hours not worked up to your guarantee. So if you only work 32 and you only have a 32-hour guarantee, those extra 8 hours, your pay would get docked that week for both your stipend and your hourly. However, there are some newer rules now where there are certain companies that are doing guaranteed stipends regardless of whether you work your full hours or not. This is kind of a newer thing, so there are some companies out there where it's like regardless of how many hours you end up working, they're still going to pay you your full stipends. And this is amazing when it happens because stipends make up a good portion of your pay. So sometimes maybe you only work 32 hours. As long as you get the full 40 of stipends, you really haven't lost that much because you've only lost a little bit on just the hourly portion.
Yep. So there's, you might think, we often get questions about like why one company does something and another company doesn't, or why would you ever work with a company that doesn't guarantee stipends, like that sort of thing. One thing you have to remember here is that there's always a give and a take with any of this stuff. So if you're working with a company that guarantees your stipends, even if you don't work your full hours, they're not just giving you free money if you're not working the hours. They have to plan for that ahead of time. What that means is they're keeping some money aside. They're paying you less, paying every person less money than they could on each weekly paycheck, because they know that a percentage of the time they're going to have to pay out these stipends that they're not actually making any money on. If you work 32 hours, they're only getting paid for 32 hours. So they're paying you for that 32 hours plus the stipends that they would have to give you for those hours that you didn't work, even though they're not getting paid for those. So they have to keep that money aside somehow. So often what you'll see is companies that guarantee stipends will have lower overall pay, and that's because they have to hold some money aside to account for those guaranteed stipends. And that's the same thing that goes for all these different perks and benefits that companies offer. A free trip, well, they're just keeping some money aside to give you that trip at the end of the year. Tuition reimbursement, same thing. They're keeping some of the money aside to give to you for tuition reimbursement, or PTO. So these are all sort of like gimmicks kind of that companies use to differentiate themselves, when in reality all they're doing is just keeping some of the money from each pay package to give to you in a different form. And that could be guaranteed stipends, it can be tuition reimbursement, it can be days off, whatever. But don't get too sucked into comparing companies based on that, because the bill rate's the same, the company's getting the same amount of money. It's just the difference is how they're allocating it. Are they allocating it all to how much you can get up front, or are they kind of keeping some aside for other special circumstances?
Yeah. So it's just kind of like a big picture thing to think about in terms of like how different companies operate. We just want you to be aware of it. That doesn't mean that, in our opinion, one company is better than another because they either guarantee stipends or don't guarantee stipends. We just want you to understand this could be the big picture thing. Maybe the company that guarantees stipends or gives the free trip or has the extra perks, yes, it means somewhere in their margins they're keeping money aside, but if for that individual contract the pay package still looks good to you and it's enough for you, then it's fine, it's great. And for some people, they would rather, even if they know in the back of their head, like maybe there's a little bit of money being left on the table, maybe I could make more. Some people just like to have that guarantee. That makes them feel more comfortable knowing they're going to always have that guarantee of income. Whereas there's other people who are just like, I just want the highest pay packages. But some people will get upset where they'll work with one company that guaranteed the stipends, then they go take a contract with another company that's not guaranteeing the stipends, and they're like, this company good, this company bad. Just there's a give and take with all this stuff. So just keep in mind. And like we said, across the board, it's mostly the case that most of them don't guarantee stipends. We only know of like one or two that guarantee the stipends.
Yeah, there's no free money in travel. Just always remember that. If it seems like a company's keeping something from you or whatever, it's rarely the case. I mean, usually they're just allocating things differently. So don't be fooled by marketing things or different little perks that companies offer, because it just means that they're keeping the money and allocating it a different way.
Yeah. So with that in mind, now that you hopefully understand a little bit better about like what guaranteed hours are and what guaranteed stipends are, these are all just questions that you're going to want to be asking in relationship to how this is going to work if you take off the holidays. Find out, get a clear picture of like, if I ask off and they're open, how does my pay going to look that week? Am I going to get all my hourly? Am I going to get all my stipends? Whatever. If the facility is closed and I don't have a choice not to work that day, am I going to get all my stipends? Am I going to get all my hourly? And if the answer is no to any of those, and they'll say like, nope, sorry, you're out of luck, you're not going to get paid for these hours you're not working, then that's when you could try to negotiate with the facility to see if you can make up the hours on a different day or whatever, if you really want to try to get paid your full paycheck that week.
Yep.
And again, we always encourage you to try, if you can, to just figure all this stuff out up front and get it written into your contract. So just like we've done videos and articles in the past about like what should be written on your contract, make sure you have guaranteed hours written in there, explained what it includes. Try to have the days off that you requested and the manager agreed to written and approved on the contract, because we've definitely been at places before where we like talked on the phone, or even got it written in our contract, like that we're going to have these days off. But then when it came to those days, our manager was like, what do you mean you're off those days? And we're like, yeah, like we talked about this, like we're off these days, but they still had you on the schedule. So it's always best to have this stuff written in your contract if possible.
Written in your contract, and then clarify it even when you're there, because sometimes what happens is the person that's writing the contract or putting stuff in or signing the contract is not the person that's your direct manager. So it gets lost in communication. Or lost in translation, I guess. So just make sure to communicate that with your direct manager that you do have those days off, just to avoid any surprises or hard feelings when the time comes.
Yeah, check the schedule, especially like if it's outpatient or something where you look at your schedule in advance. Like make sure you're not on the schedule for those days. And if you are, bring it to their attention and be like, hey, you need to cancel these appointments because I'm not going to be here that day.
Yep.
So yeah, just always, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of people with their hands in the pot when it comes to travel therapy. You've got your recruiter, you've got the staffing company, you've got your direct manager, your regional manager, all these different people. So you want to make sure everybody's on the same page in advance so there's no confusion.
Yep.
So I think that's mostly everything we wanted to cover. So we'll answer some questions if you guys have them for those that are watching live. If you have questions, now would be the time to go ahead and put them in the comments and we'll answer them.
All right, on Instagram. Hey, curious, what is the best thing to do when a clinic terminates you before starting and they don't want to abide by the 30-day notice? Good question. That is a tough situation. So technically before the contract goes into effect on your start date, there is no 30-day notice. So a clinic can cancel you all the way up until the start date and not have to abide by anything in the contract because the contract never actually started. So it's a bad situation, but that also applies on your end. So there are a lot of situations where we hear from recruiters or from facilities that a traveler the weekend before says they're not going to come, and also there's nothing that the facility can do about that. They can say, oh, I'm not going to work with you in the future, or the travel company cannot work with you in the future. The same thing applies to the clinic. If they cancel a contract early, there's really no repercussions except that you can say, I don't want to work with that clinic, or that sometimes it's like a chain or something like that. You don't want to work with them. But there's not a lot you can do. The best thing you can do is talk to your recruiters, try to find something in the area, especially if you're already on the way to the contract. But that is a worst case scenario. It doesn't happen that often. But yeah, when it does, it's a major hassle for sure.
Yeah. Lynn on Facebook says, does asking for days off in advance affect the length of the assignment? That's a really good question, Lynn, that we did not address. It may or may not. So again, everything is negotiable in travel therapy. The typical length of a contract is usually 13 weeks, but that is not set in stone by any means. You can always ask for a contract to be shorter or longer. So if you're in the process of negotiating some time off, the facility might just say, okay, that's fine. We'll just still do the start and end date at 13 weeks, and you'll have these days or this week off in the middle. But it could actually be a strategy that you use in your favor to negotiate. Sometimes if you're willing to say, I'll tack those extra days on at the end, or an extra week on at the end, or something like that, they might be more willing to negotiate and work with you, especially if they're really short-staffed. So you could use that as a strategy. You could also use as a strategy going even longer than a 13-week. Maybe if you're willing to sign, like if they're really in need of staff, if you're willing to sign a 6-month contract, well then maybe they're even more willing to be like, yeah, you could have like the whole 2 weeks off around Christmas and New Year's if you could do a 6-month contract. So it's just all negotiable. It completely depends from contract to contract, but that could be a strategy you could use to actually get it in your favor.
Yep. On average, are clinics open to the idea of travelers being off on holidays? It really depends. I would say the biggest factor is how desperate the clinic is for a traveler. If they really, really need somebody, then yes, they'll try to make it work. Especially, say it's a situation where it's a rural area that hasn't had any other people apply for that contract, and you apply for it and you say, but I really need Christmas Day and New Year's Day off, they're gonna work with it because they need somebody. But if it's a clinic where they have, say it's a desirable area or they have a lot of other applicants, then they would rather take someone, they'll take a different applicant that doesn't need days off over someone that does need days off because it's just less hassle for them. So it's very situational. I would say in general, on average, they're open to it, but it's just, usually not something they want to do. Like a hospital, they're not going to want to have their traveler off on a holiday because they know they're going to have permanent staff that's also going to ask off on that day.
Cherie says, what are some companies that y'all have worked for or would recommend? I graduate in December and I want to travel. Great question. So we have worked with a ton of different companies over the years. Again, we've been travel PTs for almost 10 years now. So we've taken contracts with various different companies. We have about a dozen that we have relationships with that we know great recruiters at. So over the years, we've taken the time to interview a lot of different companies, probably a couple dozen companies and over 100 recruiters. So that we can try to narrow down some good ones. So what I would recommend is that you fill out our recruiter recommendation form on our website. So if you go to traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters, or it's also, if you just click on the menu, click recruiter recommendations, we have a whole form that you can fill out there. It's free. And we look at each person's individual situation. We ask, like, what settings are you interested in? What states? What's important to you? So, for example, if you just graduate, like maybe mentorship and something that's new grad friendly would be important to you. And we will offer specific recommendations for specific recruiters at specific companies just for you. There's really no blanket answer to like which one's the best because two different people might have two completely different scenarios. So the best bet is, Cherie, just go ahead and fill out that form on our website and then we'll email you our recommendations.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, there's over 100 companies staffing therapists now, and that's the reason we've interviewed so many is because they all have pros and cons depending on what you're looking for. So say you're an OT looking for a school contract in California, the recommendation would be very different than a PT looking for a outpatient contract in Florida. So it just varies a lot.
Yep. All right, any other questions?
Tessa said, in relation to getting a contract canceled before starting, we start on Monday and they terminated us today.
Oof.
Yeah, so there's really not a lot of recourse. Sometimes the travel company will give you some sort of compensation. It's probably not going to be much though, because you have to remember the travel company, if the facility cancels, they're not getting paid either. They're just as upset about it as you are because they thought they had somebody locked in that they were going to be making money from as well, and now suddenly they did all this work and the contract's canceled, just like you're disappointed as well. So definitely work with your recruiters, talk to all of them, try to find something in the area, especially if you already have housing set up or you're already on the way there or you're there. Try to find something in the area. We've had situations similar to this, and we've been able to last minute try to find something 30, 45 minutes away where we can still be in the place we were planning to be and then just commute. But definitely not a great situation, and kind of the worst case scenario as a traveler. The worst case scenario is like getting it canceled on the weekend of, you're supposed to start on Monday and it gets canceled while you're on the way there. But hopefully you guys aren't already there and you can try to find something else.
Yeah, so again, it just depends. If you already have housing set up, ideally you try to find something else in the area so you can keep that housing and not have to change that whole situation. But yeah, you basically just have to talk to your recruiter and see if there's any way they can try to compensate you for this missed time. Because it's obviously not your fault, but like Jared said, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of recourse in that situation.
Yeah, and depending on the situation, say you already have housing, say you already paid for 3 months, which is, hopefully you haven't done that, but say you have. There are situations too where maybe there's not travel contracts in the area that if it was us, we would even consider going there and trying to find just like temporary work, PRN or something in the area, just to try to not waste all that money that you spent on housing already. But hopefully you haven't done that. Hopefully you're not locked in anywhere and you can just find something else either in the same area or nearby. But yeah, it depends on the situation, but definitely that's a worst case scenario of travel.
Yep. All right, let's see if there's any other questions. We'll answer them. If not, we appreciate you guys that tuned in live, and shout out to those of you that will listen later, either on our YouTube channel or our podcast. So just to summarize everything we talked about, as a traveler, you do always have to kind of plan your life in advance. So now, or even, ideally like a month ago for some of you guys, is the time to start thinking about like what the end of the year is going to look like. If you are already on contract, just make sure that you've clarified some of these things regarding how the holiday season is going to work with days off, time requests off, guaranteed hours, all that kind of stuff. Look at what's in your contract. If you're still in the situation where you have the opportunity to go ahead and book into a contract that's going to take you through the holiday season, hopefully these tips were helpful. The more you can plan ahead, the better. You can always try to negotiate things, but it really just comes down to the supply and demand for the job, whether the facility is going to negotiate with you or not. Again, if you are a physical therapist, right now is such a great time to be a travel PT. It's really one of the best travel PT job markets we've ever seen. So in most cases, you do have a good amount of leverage when it comes to these things. And so hopefully you can negotiate whatever it is that you need or want for the end of the year. But there is always a little bit of give and take depending on how desirable the job is. If you're in one of the disciplines like OT or especially CODAs, the job market is a little bit tougher right now. You may not have quite as much negotiating power on your contract, so just keep that in mind. There's always a give and take there, but hopefully you guys have a wonderful rest of your year, an exciting holiday season coming up. There's definitely a lot of logistics when it comes to being a traveler and a contractor during this time of the year, but hopefully it'll all work out in your favor. Again, if you wait till January, it's not the end of the world. It just may be that you may not be able to start, right away, right when you want to in January. Just kind of depends.
Yep, I think that's it. Yeah, watch out for our giveaways in October. That's going to apply to all therapists, not just PTs, but it is for PT month. So I think we have 2 giveaways in October. So keep an eye on Instagram for that. And if you've completed a contract with one of our recruiters, fill out our contract completion form. We only have 40 people that have filled that out, and there's a lot that are eligible. So if you fill out right now, you've got pretty good odds of winning. We're giving away 4 or 5 $200 gift cards.
I think it's 5 $200 gift cards. So for those of you that aren't familiar, at the end of every year, which is so hard to believe that that's only in like 3 months, we do end of year giveaways. So we give away several $200 gift cards to therapists that have taken jobs with our recommended recruiters. So if you know for a fact that you've already filled out our recruiter recommendation form or our hot jobs forms and you've gotten connected with one of our recruiters and you took a job with one of those recruiters, you're already eligible. All you've got to do is fill out the completion form on our website. So it's on the menu at traveltherapymentor.com under giveaway. Just fill out that completion form and let us know that you took the contract. That way we can get you entered to win. It's also an opportunity for us to get feedback if you want to give us any feedback about the recruiter that we recommended to you.
So the recruiters or the companies, we want all the feedback we can get about them. And this is the best way we know how to incentivize people that have taken contracts to give us feedback.
Yeah, so we're always trying to reassess and evaluate the recruiters that we work with because, again, we have taken the time to interview them and make sure they're good. But some recruiters just start out good and then they end up not being good because they're in a different season of their life or something happens. So we need your feedback to let us know if something went wrong so that we can decide, is that still a good recruiter to recommend to other therapists or not? We're trying to do our best to provide the most valuable information to future travelers and current travelers to help them to have the best experience. So that feedback form really helps us. But yeah, if you've filled that out, if you've taken a contract, you can fill it out. If you are finishing a contract or starting one soon, if it's going to end this year, you can go ahead and fill that out too for through the end of this year. If you haven't gotten connected with one of our recruiters, you can it's not too late to lock in a contract with one of our recruiters for this year and then become eligible for that giveaway. Yep. So yeah.
All right, that's it. We'll be back in a couple weeks as long as the baby's not here.
So for those that don't know, most of you probably do at this point if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, but I'm pregnant. I'm 36 weeks coming up this week, so we only have about a month until the baby's due, so we'll see.
We'll try to squeeze in 2 more videos, but we'll see what happens.
At least 2 might be ambitious, maybe 1. In a couple weeks, we're probably going to do a Q&A again, so stay tuned for that.
All right, take care, everyone.
Have a good night.
Bye.